Hello, amazing second grade students. Today we'll be working in science in Unit 3, Properties of Matter, Lesson 6, Matter Portfolio. This portfolio is turned in during Lesson 6, but it actually begins in Lesson 4. So you'll want to take at least 3 days completing this portfolio assignment. Let's look at your lesson to see where we should begin. Objective and key words. Here we are in lesson 4. In this portfolio, you will think like a scientist about matter. Here are your 2 key words. Mass, which is the amount of matter something contains, and matter, which is anything that has mass and takes up space. Introduction. This is a portfolio project. It will help you think like a scientist. Scientists follow steps to study and learn things. Look at this chart and think about each step. So this is the Think Like a Scientist chart. The first step at the top says ask, then observe, plan an investigation, conduct or do an investigation, and then reflect. So this is the full process that we're going to do when we turn in our portfolio. You will follow these steps. The first step is to ask questions. What is a question you have about the world? In this portfolio, you will ask questions about matter. What is matter? Matter is anything that takes up space. It has mass too. Watch the flip book to find out more about matter. So you're going to want to click play right here and watch this to learn a lot more. How do you learn about matter? You ask questions. These are a few questions you might ask. What color is it? Is it smooth or rough? Can it break easily? Look at these 2 cups. Answer the questions. So here are these 2 cups. You can see they're similar or the same in some ways, and they're very different or not the same in some ways. Here are some questions you can talk about with your learning coach. You can think like a scientist. You can think about matter. You can describe its properties. Then you can classify matter. You will follow these steps. Number 1, ask questions about matter. Number 2, observe the properties of matter. Number 3, plan an investigation to classify matter based on its properties. So we're going to sort the properties or the matter. Number 4, conduct an investigation to classify matter based on its properties. So you're going to plan your investigation and then you're actually going to do it. And number 5, reflect on patterns in the result of your investigation. So the first step is ask questions. Add some questions you have about matter to your science journal. Here are some sentence starters that can help you. What kind of matter? Blank. You could finish this sentence. Or is blank a property of matter? So I used these question starters to help me begin my science journal. Remember, your science journal might not look exactly like this. That's okay. You're still going to follow the same process. So ask questions. I wrote, what kind of matter is lemonade? I was looking at those cups and observing them, and I started thinking, what is lemonade? Number 2, I wrote, is scent or smell a property of matter? So I started wondering what that lemonade smelled like, and I thought, is that something that I could sort or classify matter using scent or smell? I don't know. Let's find out. All right, so in your science journal, you are going to keep track of all of your work. Your journal should show these things: what you observe, your plan, what happens, and what you think about it all. You will write in your science journal, and you can also draw pictures. Then you will send them to your teacher. On page 6 of your Science 2 resource book, you'll find an I Can rubric that can show you how you might be graded. That will help you do your best. All right, here's a new objective. In this section, you will describe the properties of matter that you plan to investigate. Here are some more key words. Flexibility. That's a property that affects how much something can bend or stretch. Strength. A property that affects how matter withstands force or pressure. And texture. A property that affects how something feels. How do you learn more about matter? You use your senses to observe it. You learn more about the matter's properties. So remember, when we observe things, we can use our five senses. We can use touch, taste, smell, all of those senses to tell what something is like. First, the scientists ask questions. We did that. Then they look for answers, so they observe. Here's the second step. What senses are you using to imagine what will happen? All right, so look at these two cups again. Observe them. Take a look at them. Think, how are they the same and how are they different? We can't touch or taste these, but we can see them. We can observe what they look like, right? There's lots of properties that involve our sense of sight. Ways of observing. How do you observe properties in matter? Let's find out. So watch this video and it's going to go over some properties like color. Color is one of the properties that you might observe in matter. All right, so here are the properties that we're going to observe together. We're going to look at color, texture. Remember, texture is how something feels. Flexibility, remember, that's how much something can bend or stretch. And hardness. You can observe what makes two things the same, and you can observe what makes two things different. What can you learn from those observations? So here are some more sentence starters that you can use in your science journal. Our next section is going to be called observe. So it says, I can observe matter by blank. You can finish that sentence. I can learn about matter by blank. And some questions I can answer are blank. So you don't have to write these exact sentences, but these will help you if you need something to get started with. All right, so then we're going to observe some properties of some objects. That means you're going to have to find something in your home and write about them in your science journal. So here's my example for you. I wrote observe in this section of my journal, and I wrote, I can observe matter by using my five senses. I can learn about matter by feeling it, right? That's one of the most fun ways to observe, to actually feel what something feels like. Here's a flower that I found, and I said, a flower looks colorful, right? Color is a property I can observe. It feels smooth. It bends, and it feels soft. So I've used those properties we just went over to describe a flower. You can do the same with an object in your home. All right, let's move on. Look at these two cups again. Let's call them cup 1 and cup 2. Observe these properties. You can use a table to keep track of what you observe. So here is a nice table they've made. They've put all of the properties they're observing right here and what they noticed or observed right here. So they've got color, texture, flexibility, and hardness. They're going to describe those properties for cup 1 and for cup 2. So you can do the same thing. You can observe two cups. This is a mini experiment that you can do to help you better understand. Number 1, first fill the paper cup with ice water and put a warm drink in the mug. So here is my paper cup. It has ice cold water. You can actually maybe see there's some condensation on the outside. It's so cold. And then here's my nice warm toasty drink that's in my mug, right? That's important so it doesn't burn you. You don't want to put a hot drink in your paper cup. All right, now we're going to observe and compare their properties. We're going to talk about how they're the same and how they're different. How many properties did you observe? Write your observations in your science journal and use a table to track your work. So in my science journal, in my same observation sections, I've done some observations from my mini experiment. Here's my ice cold cup. I actually drew a mug, but I drew the ice in it so you can see it's the cold one. And here's my hot drink or my hot water in the warm cup, warm mug. All right, so here I have the properties, color, texture, flexibility, and hardness. And here's where I wrote my observations. I wrote both have clear liquid inside, right? We were putting water inside, so they have clear liquid. You might have used warm milk or warm tea in your mug, but I used water in both. The texture, I said the mug and the cup are smooth. If I feel the sides, they're both very smooth. They're not bumpy at all. For my next property, flexibility, I said the paper cup is a little flexible. I don't want to spill my drink, but look at this. I can actually squeeze it. I cannot do that to the mug. So it is a little bit flexible. And then the hardness. The mug is very hard, way harder than that paper cup. So those were the observations I made about how they were similar and how they were different. Here are some more questions that you can talk about after your mini experiment with your learning coach. You can talk about observing the object's flexibility and observing its strength. And then you can complete this activity at home as well. So you've got some matching. You're going to talk about what flexibility is, strength, hardness, color, and texture. You can drag these right up and match them together. Then you can check your answer. All right, we've got a new objective. In this section, you will plan an investigation to classify different matter by their properties. Here are new keywords. Flexibility is a property that affects how much something can bend or stretch. Matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. And texture is a property that affects how something feels. Now we're going to plan an investigation. This is an important step when you think like a scientist. So here we are, plan an investigation. You will investigate properties. Watch this video to learn how to plan an investigation. So there's going to be an example in here that will help you quite a bit. Make sure you watch this video. Use a table. The student in the video used a table to plan their investigation. They planned to observe color, texture, hardness, and flexibility. This is how their table looked. Use the data table to answer the questions. So talk about these questions with your learning coach, but don't worry about putting this table in your interactive notebook. You're actually going to have one that is already made for you. All right, here are some more questions that you can talk about with your learning coach. Make sure you ask all of these and answer them. Now it's time to plan your own investigation. Think like a scientist. How will you classify matter based on its properties? Think about the things you will need. Think about how you will set up your table. Think about the steps you will take. So here's the planning section. You're going to write this in your science journal. You need to write the materials. You also need to write down the steps. You can also use the 5-column chart that's already included in your science notebook. Now, if you don't have this for any reason or you make a mistake, don't worry. I also have a downloadable and printable form that's in the description. You can use that if you need to. This will get turned into your teacher, so make sure that you use this. So this is a great stopping point for day 1. Day 2, you can go ahead and take that chart after your child's thought about what you're going to do in the experiment, and you can go ahead and start filling that in. For now, if you'd like to get started on your journal, you can write down the materials you will need if your child already knows, and you can write down the steps that you plan on doing, but we'll talk about that a bit more in the next lesson. So on day 2, you're going to go ahead and want to move from lesson 4 to lesson 5. Let's start that lesson. Sometimes they take a minute to load. All right, here's our new objective and keywords. In this section, you will conduct, so you will do your investigation to describe the properties of matter. Here are our keywords again. Flexibility, a property that affects how much something can bend or stretch. Matter, anything that has mass and takes up space. And texture, a property that affects how something feels. Okay, so now we're going to do our investigation and we're going to need that 5-column chart for this. We will investigate the properties of matter. You can watch this really helpful video to learn more about how you can conduct your investigation. All right, so review your plan. Let's go ahead and look at my example in my science journal. The first thing I wrote down for my plan were the materials I was going to need. You do not have to have the same materials as me or the same materials that you watched in the earlier video example. For me, I tried to use things I was already using for my mini experiment. So I decided I was going to use a mug because I already had it out. I also used a flower because I had observed some properties of a flower earlier today too. I gathered a toy car, a marker, I was writing with one already, and a feather. I thought these would be really cool because I thought they might have some similar properties and I thought they might have some different properties. Here are my steps, pretty simple, just 3. First, I will gather materials. Next, I will observe the objects using my senses. And last, I will use a table to write down my observations. So make sure you gather at least 3 materials. I gathered 5, but you're going to want to have at least 3 for this portfolio lesson. Okay, so these are what we're going to do in our, or observe in our objects. We're going to observe the color, the flexibility, the hardness, and the texture. All right, here are some examples they gave. You can use anything around your house. All right, so study each object and answer these questions. Is it colorful or not colorful? Is it smooth or rough? Is it hard or not hard? Is it flexible or not flexible? Here's an activity that you can do where you match some items up with their properties correctly. And here's that 5-column chart again. So I have already conducted my experiment. That means I've already gathered all those materials, I've observed and studied them, and now I've written down my observations. So here's that 5-column chart that you're going to have as well. And here are my 5 objects. Now, if you don't have 5, that's okay, but you need at least 3. So for my mug, I needed to observe the color, the texture, the hardness, and the flexibility. I said the mug was white, and if your object has multiple colors, pick the one that it mostly has. So the main color of my mug was white. It's very smooth. Its texture is smooth. It's also very hard. I could even knock on it. It will not break. And it is not flexible. There's no way that I can bend this mug, right? It's not flexible at all. So I repeated that same process of recording my observations for each item. Here's my flower. You can see it's much different than my mug, right? It's the color pink mostly. I didn't really worry about the leaves, just the flower itself. It is very smooth too. Feels a little bit different, but it's definitely smooth. It's soft, much softer than the mug, and it is a little bit bendy, right? So it is a little bit flexible. I can bend it. I can bend the stem, I can bend the petals, so it is bendy or flexible. All right, so there's my flower. Next, I had a toy car. Now, my toy car had a different color. Again, it's mostly blue, right? I use blue because that's the main color. It's bumpy. If I feel it, I feel bumps on the tires. I feel bumps on the windows. So it's very bumpy. It's not very smooth when I feel it for the texture. It's very hard, like the mug, and it is not flexible. There's no way this is going to bend, right? It is completely solid, so it is not flexible at all. For my marker, I just used one of the ones that I was already using. Here it is. It doesn't matter. Oh, well, it does matter. I didn't use that green one. I used a red one. So the only one it's really going to be too different is the color. So for the one that I used, it was red. It's very smooth, right? There are no bumps on it. It is hard. I can tap on it and it won't break. And it's not flexible. There's no way it's going to bend either. All right. And then my last one was a feather. I found this really giant feather outside. I think it belonged to a sandhill crane. And I thought it was pretty cool, so I wanted to observe it. It's the color gray. It's very silky feeling. So I could have just put smooth again, but I had used that word a lot. So I use the word silky because it's very silky smooth. Has a really neat slick texture. It's also very soft and it is somewhat flexible. I think if you tried to bend it too much, it would probably break or it'd get bent permanently, but it does have some flexibility. So I did say that it is somewhat, that means sort of flexible, not super flexible. All right, so that is the 5-column chart that you're going to complete in your science journal or your science notebook. Like I said, if anything happens to it, if you don't have it, I do have it in the description, so you can print it from there as well. Okay, here's our new objective. In this lesson, you will reflect or think about the results of your investigation. Flexibility is one of our keywords we've seen a few times, right? It's a property that affects how much something can bend or stretch. We saw that in some of our objects. Hardness is a property that affects how firm and solid something is. Matter is anything that has mass and takes up space, and texture is a property that affects how something feels. You can think like a scientist. You can follow the steps. The last step is to reflect. You can think about what you learned. So that's the question in the center. What did you learn? Watch this video to learn more about how you can reflect on your investigation. Use a table. The student in the video used a table to collect their data about matter. They collected information on the properties of color, flexibility, hardness, and texture. This is how their table looked when they were done. So it's not exactly the same as the chart we used, but it's very similar. You can use it to compare properties of the different objects. Then you can use a table to answer the questions. So answer these questions with your learning coach based on the information that's in this table. Reflect on your data. You followed your plan. Now it is time to reflect. First, you can study your data. Then you can show it another way. Last, you can compare the data to learn more. I like his thinking face. Here's an activity that can help compare objects' properties. You can talk about what's the same and what is different, right? That's something that you might reflect on and think about with your objects. And then here is something that you might want to write about in your science journal, which I'll get to in our next lesson, and you might want to complete in your resource book or print out. These are definitely going to get turned in, so how you do it is up to you. If you already have them in your resource book, then complete them right inside, and if you need to print them out, that's absolutely fine too. So let's go ahead and see what these look like. Here are the concept webs. And you can see in the center, there's a spot for you to put your object, and around it, we're going to fill it in using those properties that we've already observed. So before we move on, let me show you my examples. Now you only have to do 3 of these. So if you observe more than 3 objects, I observe 5, that's okay. You only need to turn 3 concept webs into your teacher. So here's the first one I chose. I chose my flower. I wrote pink, that was the color, right? Smooth, that was the texture, right? Soft, that was the hardness. And bendy, that was the flexibility. So I repeated this process for 3 of the objects I investigated. Here's my toy car. And here is my feather. So you're going to do the same thing. You can draw a picture or you could even take a picture if you want to take a picture and then print it and put it in here. You're going to put a picture of your object in the center and then you're going to use those properties and record them in each square of your concept web. So again, this is going to get turned in to your teacher. So you want to make sure that you print out all 3 or you complete them in your resource book and you take pictures for your final portfolio to show your teacher. All right, so this is a great stopping point for day 2. We're at the end of lesson 5. So before we move on to lesson 6 and we finish that full reflection in our science notebook, you might want to go ahead and take a break here and then begin again tomorrow. So let's go ahead and move to lesson 6. Start lesson. Loading again. We're going to move on to another mini experiment and our full reflection in our journal. Objective. In this section, you will explain patterns in the world by comparing properties of matter. Ooh, we've got a lot of keywords this time. Gas is a state of matter that does not have a fixed volume or a fixed shape. Liquid is a state of matter that has a fixed volume but not a fixed shape. Matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. A state is a form in which matter can exist. It's either going to be solid, liquid, or gas. And solid is a state of matter that has a fixed volume and a fixed shape. All right, you have learned about matter. You have been thinking like a scientist. There is one last step in the process. The final step is to reflect. So we've already started that a bit, right? But we're going to continue reflecting in this lesson. States of matter in nature. One property of matter is state. A matter state can take 3 forms. It can be a solid, it can be a liquid, it can be a gas. Watch the video to review the different states of matter. So definitely review this video and it's going to teach you a lot more. Finding patterns. The states of matter are found in nature. Other properties of matter are found in nature too. There are patterns in the properties of matter in nature. So look at these adorable examples. I love this little tortoise and I love this little salamander. And this is a beautiful strong tree. So observe how you can see different properties looking at each example. The shell of the turtle is hard, right? We can talk about hardness. We can talk about the salamander's skin is soft and it's also wet, right? That's how it feels. We can also talk about the strong tree trunk, right? It's very strong to keep the tree standing. Here's another animal. It's an earthworm. What properties do earthworms share? How do these properties help them in nature? Here's a flower with a beautiful butterfly. What properties do many flowers share? How do these properties help flowers in nature? So talk about these questions with your learning coach, and then you can reveal some example answers as well. All right, here are some more questions that you can go over and discuss out loud with your learning coach. And here is our mini experiment that we're going to do. It's a second one. It's different from the cup experiment. You compared different objects and you found patterns in the properties that they shared. Look for patterns at home. You can find patterns in nature. So for this, we're going to need new materials, but we don't have to make a list. They've already made the list for us. We need different types of leaves or leaf pictures, different types of flowers or flower pictures, and different types of animals from the same group. So dogs, cats, fish, or birds. All right, so I looked up pictures for this instead of gathering those materials, especially dogs. I couldn't really gather a lot of dogs. I only have one. But here are the steps of what you're going to do. Start with one group from nature, such as the leaves. Study and compare their properties. Look for patterns. What properties do all the examples in the group share? Write what you found in your science journal and repeat for each group. All right, so let's go ahead and look at some of the examples I found just doing a quick internet search. I looked up leaf photography, right? Taking photos of leaves. And I found all of these beautiful pictures. And when I was looking at them, I noticed something really cool. I didn't even see a green leaf in any of these first pictures. But I realized that's because I see the word fall, the word fall, and I even saw another one that had the word fall in it. So these are all leaves that have changed color for the fall season. Not every leaf does that, but many, many do. So one thing that I did in my reflection is I noted a property shared by many leaves is changing colors. A lot of them change colors for the fall season. So that is one of my observations. That's something I thought about when I was reflecting. All right, now let's look at some flower photography, some photos of flowers. I already talked about color of my flower, right? Here's one that's actually kind of similar to my flower. So I didn't want to just talk about color again. But when I was looking at all of these and thinking about what they had in common and what was the same, I noticed that even though they looked different, they all had flower petals. And knowing what I know from the flower I touched, I bet a lot of those are soft. So I wrote, a property shared by many flowers is soft petals. So they all have soft petals. That's something else that they have in common. So we're talking about the texture, right? How they feel. Okay, and here are some adorable photos of dogs. So let's look at them and observe them and then reflect or think about something that they all have in common. I don't really want to talk about color, right? I already did that with the leaves, and these dogs are a lot of different colors. I don't want to talk about their texture necessarily because I talked about the soft petals, but I do see something that they have texture-wise that's not the same as a petal, right? Maybe we can write about texture. Here is what I thought about and reflected on. A property shared by many dogs is fluffy fur, right? Some of them might be fuzzy instead of fluffy, but most of them are soft and fluffy. So I recorded that most of them have fluffy fur. So another texture one, and that's okay if you use the same property more than once. All right, let's go back to your lesson. So here are those examples for sentence starters that you can use. And if you didn't do dogs, if you did something else, a different type of animal, that's perfectly fine. You just want to change out that word dogs with whatever animal you chose to use instead. All right, so you're going to write these thoughts in your science journal, and you can also draw pictures if you want to too. All right, in this portfolio, you learned about matter. Look around. You can see many things made of matter. Nature is full of matter. Investigating matter. Think about the investigation you did in this portfolio. You collected objects, you observed their properties, and you followed the steps that scientists use to study things. And here are those think like a scientist steps again. Look at what you already wrote in your science journal, and then let's think about your investigation a little bit more. So we were just reflecting on that mini experiment, but now we want to reflect on the experiment you did with your objects when you were testing their properties. So here are some sentence starters. I learned that matter, dot, dot, dot. My investigation was, dot, dot, dot. The most difficult part was, I was thinking like a scientist when I, So you're going to fill in those blanks with your answer. You can write and you can also draw in your science journal. And if you have any new questions about matter, you can add those too. So here is the rest of my reflect section. I wrote, I learned that matter is everywhere. Like they just said, look around. I see all sorts of matter. My investigation was a good way to observe properties of matter. I learned a lot about my objects. And the most difficult part for me was recording my data. It took a lot of work to write down all of those observations. So if you go to the next page, you will see how to organize and submit your portfolio. And here are all of the things you want to include. You want to make sure from your science journal you include the pages that show the Ask Questions section, the Observe section, the Plan section, and the Reflection section. That's way down here. But you also want to include the pages that have your 5-column chart and at least 3 concept webs. Remember, you don't have to do more than 3. So just do these, even if you had more objects, that's okay. Just do these 3 to get full credit. As long as you turn those in, you will be fine. If you need to print any of these because they got messed up in your journal or your resource book, or you just don't have them for some reason, I'll have the links to all of them in my description of this video. All right, so when you're done with all of that, remember you can look at that I Can rubric again to show you how to get the very best grade. And then you're just going to want to make sure that you turn it in to your teacher. Don't forget any of those pages. If you have any questions, reach out. I think if you follow all these steps, you're going to do a great job. And remember, don't do it all at once. Take at least 3 days to work on this portfolio. It's a lot of work, but you're going to learn so much about matter. Thanks for watching. I will see you next time. Goodbye.